When people go missing, it often stirs a mix of emotions and uncertainty. While some individuals are found after extensive searches, sometimes alive, other times tragically deceased, there are cases that remain unresolved, with the trails going cold. Despite efforts, some of these mysteries linger, leaving families and investigators without answers. Join us in this video as we take you through the creepiest cases of people disappearing. Number 4. The Frog Boys. On March 26, 1991, South Korea experienced a historic moment as local elections were held for the first time in 30 years, restoring autonomy to cities and towns after decades of military rule. This pivotal shift towards democracy allowed South Koreans to elect mayors, council members, and other officials, marking a significant milestone. The day was declared a national holiday to ensure that every citizen could vote, and media coverage extensively highlighted the country's return to democratic governance. While South Korea was engrossed in this momentous event, 5 boys aged 9 to 13 in a town near Daegu were blissfully unaware of the political upheaval. Enthralled by their passion for animals, they planned to spend their rare Tuesday off from school searching for frogs and salamanders. Around 9 that morning, Jong-Woo's son, Cheol-won, burst through the front door, grabbed a coat, and then returned for a warmer one, leaving Jong-Woo curious about his sudden departure. Cheol-won, eager to join his friends, did not disclose his plans. A few hours later, Jong-Woo received a concerning call from Cheol-won's taekwondo instructor, inquiring about the boy's absence from class. Alarmed, Jong-Woo learned that not only had Cheol-won and his friends disappeared, but they had also been secretive about their plans. The boys, who were known to frequent Mount Waryong, were last seen excitedly heading there. Despite a thorough search by the parents and a tip from a friend, the boys were not found. When the police were contacted, they dismissed the case, labeling the boys as runaways who would likely return. This dismissiveness only heightened the family's anxiety. Media coverage, initially focused on the historic elections, eventually acknowledged the missing children. But the response was minimal, offering little support or solace to the distraught families. As days passed with no updates on the boys' disappearance, the story eventually garnered national attention a week after the election coverage faded. Media interest surged, and the Square of Public Opinion, a prominent news program, invited the parents to discuss their frustrations with the slow and indifferent police investigation. During a live broadcast, a distressing moment occurred when a tearful voice was heard over the call-in segment but was abruptly cut off. Hope surged when a telephone operator announced that one of the missing boys had called, but it was soon revealed to be a prank, dashing the community's hopes. Moved by the broadcast, the South Korean president took decisive action, creating a special investigative center and mobilizing 300,000 police personnel for a statewide search. Despite extensive searches and a $35,000 reward, no leads emerged. The fathers, devastated by the lack of progress, abandoned their jobs and embarked on a nationwide journey, distributing flyers and seeking clues. The emotional toll was heavy. Some fathers struggled with severe distress, addiction, and financial strain. Eventually, they had to cease their search and return to their jobs, their hope diminished but enduring. 2 years after resuming their lives and 5 years after their sons vanished, the fathers had largely managed to rebuild their routines. Despite this, their missing children remained ever present in their minds. Then, as life started to return to some semblance of normalcy, a chilling theory emerged from a criminal psychologist who had taken an interest in the case. This psychologist, a respected figure in South Korea with experience studying in the United States, suggested that one of the fathers might have been responsible for the boys' deaths, claiming the father had buried the children in his basement. The police responded swiftly, conducting a thorough search of the accused father's home. An excavator was used to dig up the basement, and the search was broadcast live, with cameras capturing every moment. Despite the extensive effort, no remains were found. The psychologist, however, faced a hostile reaction from the public and was evacuated by police for his safety. Tragically, the father in question passed away 5 years later from liver cancer at the age of 49. Media interest in the case waned, but the remaining fathers continued their desperate pleas. Then, 11 years after the boy's disappearance, a significant discovery was made. While picking acorns on Mount Warryong, two men stumbled upon a tangle of bones identified as the Frog Boys. The police's mishandling of the bones, mixing skulls with skulls, femurs with femurs, compromised the evidence. The following day, at a press conference, the police announced that hypothermia was the most likely cause of death. The cold and rainy weather on the day of their disappearance, with temperatures plummeting to 3 degrees Celsius, would have worsened the risk of hypothermia. The initial assumption that the boys had huddled together for warmth seemed plausible given their bundled bodies and knotted clothing. However, as investigators examined the remains, more troubling details emerged. Untangled clothes revealed live rounds and empty cartridges. Additionally, 3 of the 5 skulls showed blunt force trauma, likely from a metal object or tool. These findings suggested foul play rather than a simple case of hypothermia. The proximity of the bodies, less than 2 kilometers from their homes, cast further doubt on the idea that they had become lost and succumbed to the cold. The discovery of the boys' remains ignited numerous theories. Authorities considered the possibility of a pattern, though no similar crime scenes were discovered. One theory linked the deaths to the nearby South Korean Army installation, which had a shooting range. Although official drills were suspended for the elections, officers had access to the range. The boys were found just 100 to 200 meters downrange, within the range of the weapons used. Despite allegations, no specific officer was identified, and no investigation into the base or its personnel was conducted. The parents filed 3 lawsuits against the police for mishandling the investigation, but all were unsuccessful. The boys' bones, mixed and stored for years, were eventually cremated collectively. This case, still unsolved, stands as one of the creepiest cases of people disappearing. Number 3. Hannah Upp. Hannah Upp grew up in Oregon in a faith-centered household, with her parents committed to ministering to Japanese-American Christians and others. Her childhood was stable and warm, but as she grew older, differences in religious views created tension between her parents. This rift led to her mother filing for divorce when Hannah was 15. After the divorce, Hannah's father embarked on missionary work in countries like Zimbabwe, Malta, and India. Despite their differences, Hannah admired her father and visited him almost every year. Meanwhile, her mother moved to a retreat near Philadelphia, seeking peace and a fresh start. Hannah's friends remembered her as genuine, upbeat, trustworthy, and kind, but they also noted her low tolerance for stress and difficulty handling tough situations. By 2008, Hannah was excited about her role as a teacher in New York City, where she spent the summer preparing for the new school year, set to begin on August 28th. However, when Hannah didn't show up for the first day of class, her school administrators became concerned and contacted her apartment. Her roommate, unaware of Hannah's whereabouts, found her passport, phone, and pocketbook on her bedroom floor. Friends and coworkers quickly organized a citywide search, focusing on places Hannah frequented. By the next day, her disappearance had captured national attention, with her images circulating in newspapers, posters, and TV broadcasts across all 5 boroughs. Security cameras captured glimpses of her, starting with an Apple store in Manhattan, where she was casually dressed and using a display computer to check her email. A man recognized her and asked if she was the missing woman. 2 weeks later, she was seen in a Soho Starbucks, where she quickly exited through the back door as police closed in. A bystander confirmed the sighting to authorities, but Hannah remained missing. On September 16th, over 3 weeks after her disappearance, a ferryboat captain near the Statue of Liberty spotted what appeared to be a dead body floating in New York Harbor. The body, which appeared tanned and had been in the water for some time, shocked crew members when it took a deep breath and began to cry. Hannah was pulled onto the boat and taken to a nearby hospital, where she was treated for severe dehydration, sunburn, and hypothermia. As she recovered, investigators questioned her, but she had no recollection of what had happened during her disappearance, although she remembered everything before. Surprisingly, she insisted she needed to return to work, believing it was still the day she had gone missing. Hannah was diagnosed with dissociative fugue, a rare disorder marked by significant memory loss and episodes of missing time, ranging from hours to years. This condition often affects young adults and can worsen over time for unknown reasons. The most notable case was Ansel Bourne, a clergyman from Rhode Island who, in the late 1880s, lost all memory of his previous life 2 months after moving to Pennsylvania. Dissociative fugue is usually triggered by severe trauma, but no clear cause was found in Hannah's case, despite extensive hypnosis. During her brief stay in a psychiatric facility, her positive attitude surprised many. Hannah herself doubted the diagnosis, suspecting she might have been drugged or rendered unconscious after a hit and run. Nonetheless, her doctors remained confident, and Hannah eventually left New York to join her mother at the retreat. After her time in New York, Hannah Upp moved to Maryland to work as a teacher's aide at a Montessori school. However, she again missed the first day of the fall semester in September 2013. A jogger on a hiking trail found her wallet and phone, prompting a search. Investigators discovered she hadn't stayed in her apartment the previous night, and a co-worker reported seeing her driving away from the school that morning. For Hannah's mother, it was a painful case of déjà vu. 2 days later, around 11 p.m., Hannah's mother received a surprising call. The word "Mom" came the almost inaudible voice on the other end. Hannah explained she remembered going for an early morning run but couldn't recall anything afterward. She woke up in Wheaton, Maryland, lying in a cold creek. After being taken to a nearby hospital, Hannah eventually recovered and earned her Montessori teaching certification. She then accepted a position at a school in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. There, in the warm embrace of the Caribbean, Hannah found the peace and fulfillment she had longed for, leaving behind the shadows of her past experiences in New York and Maryland. Hannah thrived in her new role and adored the stunning surroundings of St. Thomas. By the fall of 2017, she had been a head teacher for 3 years, enjoying her free time swimming and soaking up the beauty of Sapphire Beach. However, her tranquility was shattered when Hurricane Irma struck the Caribbean in late August, just before the autumn semester began. While many islanders evacuated, Hannah chose to ride out the storm with a few co-workers, huddling in a small laundry room as the hurricane ravaged the island, claiming over 50 lives. Just days later, Hurricane Maria loomed. Despite the chaos, Hannah diligently worked on her lesson plans and tidied her drenched apartment. But as Hurricane Maria approached, 32-year-old Hannah disappeared for the third time. Her disappearance was first noted when she missed a crucial teachers' meeting, and she was last seen on September 14th leaving her apartment. She had left a note for her roommate, mentioning a swim at Sapphire Beach and plans to return to school to wrap up some tasks, but she never showed up. Her cell phone, passport, and pocketbook were found in her unlocked car near Sapphire Beach. Additional personal items were discovered at a local hamburger joint she frequented, but staff reported that Hannah had been acting strangely. More troubling, her shoes, clothes, and car keys were found in the sand near the lake the following morning. The search for Hannah intensified, with volunteers scouring the island and surrounding areas. It appeared she might have gone for a swim, a common activity for her. The Coast Guard deployed helicopters to assist, but their efforts were soon redirected to other pressing needs due to the hurricanes. Hannah's mother moved to St. Thomas, frequently visiting Sapphire Beach in hopes of finding her daughter. Despite ongoing searches and efforts, Hannah has remained missing since the day she vanished, with no further clues about her whereabouts. Hannah's disappearances each fall, coinciding with the start of the school year, suggest a troubling pattern. Despite her passion for teaching, the stress and pressure of her profession may have overwhelmed her, especially during the tumultuous year of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The recurring presence of water in her disappearances adds another layer of mystery. Each time, Hannah was found in or near water, yet the reasons remain elusive. While it's possible that she was washed out to sea after a swim, the exact circumstances behind her repeated disappearances are still unknown. Despite extensive searches and numerous theories, Hannah's case remains unsolved. Before we move on, here's our subscriber's pick. Take a look at this photo. I'm sure there are likely countless possibilities running through your mind about what led to this scene. Perhaps the car accidentally plunged into the water while being driven, or maybe both the vehicle and its occupant were deliberately disposed of. The skeleton's sitting position raises even more questions, and one wonders how long the car has been submerged for the body to have decayed to this state. This photo closely mirrors a real case involving a volunteer dive team led by Dave Yurkovich. They were searching a lake in West Palm Beach for Michael John Olson, a man who disappeared in 1979 along with his Pontiac Grand Prix. Using sonar, the team located a submerged car that matched the dimensions of Olson's vehicle. However, when Yurkovich dived down to investigate, he discovered that the car was a 1987 Honda Prelude, not Olson's. The Honda showed signs of extensive damage, with the keys still in the ignition. As Yurkovich searched the vehicle, he found what appeared to be a bone fragment, which he handed over to the police for further analysis. When the police later pulled the car from the lake, its condition was severely deteriorated from decades underwater, leaving many questions unresolved. The mystery surrounding Olson's disappearance remains unsolved and makes it stand as one of the creepiest cases of people disappearing. So viewers, what do you think about the photo in Olson's case? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Number 2. William and Margaret Patterson. William Pat Patterson grew up in a tough Chicago neighborhood where he developed sharp wit and persuasive skills, starting at a carnival in the 1920s. By the 1930s, he shifted to sales jobs and met Margaret while traveling through Indiana. Although their romance was quick, Margaret's family disapproved of Pat, partly because he wasn't Catholic. Margaret eventually cut ties with her family, possibly due to pressure to choose between them and Pat. Pat became increasingly obsessed with making money, working as a salesman for a camera company where he discovered a talent for photography. Around 1940, he and Margaret moved to El Paso, where Pat convinced a local moneylender to give him an unsecured loan to start a business. By 1950, Patterson's photo supply company was thriving, generating around $350,000 annually, which is over $4 million today. The couple enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, flaunting their wealth with expensive watches, sports cars, and stylish clothes. However, Pat's new wealth also fueled his arrogance and troubling behavior. In February 1956, Pat got into trouble in Juarez, Mexico, after an argument with a waiter over a drink for a young woman he claimed was his mistress. His temper led to a severe beating and his expulsion from the club. On March 4, 1958, Pat and his friend, fellow business owner Cecil Ward, were working on a boat in Pat's garage. That evening, Pat invited Cecil and his wife to dinner, while Pat and Cecil continued working on the boat, and Margaret and Cecil's wife chatted in the living room. The next night, Pat invited Cecil back to finish the job, but Cecil couldn't make it. On March 6th, Cecil arrived at his shop to find Pat's Cadillac parked outside but no sign of Pat. A friend mentioned that Pat needed the car serviced because the horn was broken. Del Kirkland, who managed a rival camera supply company, was seen driving Pat's Cadillac. Kirk explained that he had been helping Pat with the boat repairs and had received a late-night call from Pat, who mentioned taking Margaret on a short trip. Although trips were common for the couple, the late-night call and sudden departure were unusual. On March 15th, nearly a week later, a strange and urgent telegram arrived for Pat's accountant, Herb. It instructed Kirk to take over Pat's store, sell Pat's trailer for business funds, and rent out their house for 9 months. The telegram, sent from a Western Union payphone at Dallas's Love Field Airport, also requested the cancellation of Pat's photography convention registration in Washington. The final cryptic message read, "Handle everything discreetly. It's crucial. You'll understand. Pat." The telegram was the last known communication from Pat or Margaret. A month or two later, their neighbor's child found their cat, Tommy, back in the neighborhood. But Tommy, now thin and skittish, was a stark contrast to his usually well-cared-for self. Margaret had always ensured Tommy was looked after during their vacations, even reportedly feeding him caviar, showing her deep affection for him. As the year passed after the couple's disappearance, other oddities came to light. Their utilities stayed active, their expensive clothes were still at the dry cleaners, and their mail wasn't redirected until April 27th, more than a month later. Strangely, the mail continued being delivered to Pat's store rather than where they were supposedly headed. Pat's father, who lived nearby, seemed unconcerned and suggested that their disappearance wasn't entirely unexpected, given Pat's history of vanishing acts, which dated back to his days at the carnival in Chicago. About a year after Pat and Margaret disappeared, their photography business fell into receivership. The bank refused to honor the company's checks because Pat had been silent for so long. Herb, Pat's accountant, was appointed as the receiver, taking charge of managing deposits and approving transactions. This effectively made Kirk the new manager, while Herb became the custodian of the business's assets. Herb's income saw a notable boost, with a monthly salary of $800 from the business, equivalent to over $99,000 today, and an additional $200 monthly retainer from his legal practice, about $2,300 in today's terms. Soon after, Herb received a strange letter postmarked from Laredo, Texas, supposedly from Pat. The letter claimed that the couple intended to disappear forever, relocating to an unknown place. It also detailed a curious distribution of Pat's estate, dividing assets among Herb, Kirk, and one of Pat's employees. Despite the letter's claims, handwriting experts couldn't conclusively verify its authenticity, and the police grew suspicious, especially since the estate was left to Herb and his associates rather than to Pat's own family. As a result, the assets remained in legal limbo, and the letter continued to raise doubts. About a year later, there were reports of Pat and Margaret being spotted in Valle de Bravo, Mexico, but these turned out to be cases of mistaken identity. Later sightings in the US and Canada also led nowhere. On March 7, 1964, the couple was officially declared deceased, leaving the case unsolved for more than 2 decades. In 1984, a former caregiver came forward with startling information. He revealed finding blood in Pat's garage and a fragment of what seemed to be human scalp on the boat's propeller. He also claimed to have seen one of Pat's associates loading bloody sheets into a car trunk. The identity of this associate was never disclosed. The caregiver, an undocumented immigrant at the time in 1957, had feared deportation and so had waited to speak up. Unfortunately, this lead was never thoroughly investigated. By 1960, Kirk had moved away and transferred ownership of the photo shop to an employee, and then the trail on him went cold. The Patterson case presents 2 possible scenarios. Either Pat and Margaret genuinely left, making the letter and telegram real, or someone carefully staged a false trail. Pat's flashy personality makes the first possibility believable, but many details suggest a more sinister outcome. The caregiver's specific claims and the unverified letter cast doubt on what truly happened, leaving the Pattersons' fate a lingering mystery. Number 1. Marjorie West. On Sunday, May 8, 1938, the West family began their day early, traveling from Buffalo, New York to Bradford, Pennsylvania, for church. After Mass, Shirley and his wife, Cecilia, took their 3 children to the Allegheny Forest for a Mother's Day picnic. Following lunch, the family separated to enjoy the afternoon. At around 3 o'clock, Cecilia went to the car for a nap, while Shirley went fishing. 11-year-old Dorothea watched over her younger siblings as they picked flowers. Dorothea, holding a bouquet of wild violets, went to give them to her mother. After delivering the flowers, she returned to find her brother alone. Marjorie, her 4-year-old sister, was missing. At first, the family thought Marjorie might be hiding for fun, but as time passed and she didn't reappear, they grew increasingly anxious. Shirley rushed 7 miles to Kane to report her disappearance to the police. Officers and over 200 volunteers began an intensive search of the forest, continuing by flashlight until early morning, despite rain. The next day, 500 people combed the woods, and authorities established checkpoints within a 300-mile radius. Bloodhounds brought in to track Marjorie's scent led searchers to a sealed cottage, but found nothing connected to her. Her family reported that the scent trail ended at a roadside, suggesting she might have been abducted by a passing car. In response to growing fears, the mayor of Bradford called for 1,000 volunteers. Over 2,500 people arrived, searching the 35-square-mile area in a line through the forest. They found a few clues. A piece of lace near a boulder, though Marjorie's clothing had no lace, and a recently dug pit the size of a child, which turned out to contain wine containers. Marjorie's father, Shirley, remained in the forest searching for over a week, only briefly returning home on May 16th to eat dinner. The nation became captivated by the unfolding drama in western Pennsylvania, with posters, bounties, and nationwide news coverage. During this time, the police interviewed anyone with information. Witnesses reported seeing 3 cars in the forest when Marjorie disappeared. One car, a Plymouth sedan, was seen driving so recklessly that another vehicle had to swerve into a ditch to avoid it. The driver of the Plymouth was never identified, although the occupants of the other 2 cars were located and cleared. Despite these efforts, the search yielded no results, and by October 1938, the massive effort had dwindled to just 4 police officers continuing the search for the missing red-haired child. A decade before Marjorie's disappearance, the 1929 stock market crash led the U.S. into severe economic hardship, with over 12 million Americans unemployed by 1933. This economic despair fueled desperation and a rise in child abductions. As cars and highways became more common, children were often lured into vehicles, taken to orphanages, and sold for up to $1,000, equivalent to nearly $24,000 today. Unlike the stranger danger panic of the 1980s, the first half of the 20th century had ample evidence of such crimes. In 1950, it was reported that a Tennessee children's home paid $1 million for 1,000 babies during the 1930s, often persuading struggling parents to sell their children. Many abducted children ended up in these institutions. When Marjorie disappeared in 1938, authorities considered the possibility of abduction, especially after a complaint from a neighboring state. Days after Mother's Day, a cab driver in Thomas, West Virginia, reported seeing a man with a small, crying girl matching Marjorie's description at around 11:30 p.m. The timeline added credibility. If Marjorie had been abducted from Pennsylvania at 3 p.m., they would have arrived in Thomas about 8 hours later, aligning with the sighting. However, authorities later identified a man traveling that evening with his 5-year-old daughter, who was crying because she wanted to go home. Despite this explanation, the connection to Marjorie remained unresolved, and the trail went cold. More than 60 years later, Marjorie's case took a new turn. In 1998, Harold Bud Beck, a writer and college lecturer, investigated the case for a book. He offered a $10,000 reward for leads on Marjorie's whereabouts and posted photos of her and her sister Dorothea on his website, hoping to find a resemblance. Bud soon found a woman in Florida who looked strikingly similar to Dorothea. Although she denied being Marjorie when they met, she later contacted Bud again in 2005, expressing a desire to talk. The woman, identified as Sylvia Waldrop London, returned to her family's farm in North Carolina, reigniting hopes that Marjorie might finally be found. Sylvia shared a startling story her mother had told her before dying. She allowed Bud to share her story under strict conditions. Her identity was to remain secret from everyone except Dorothea, and the story could only be published after Sylvia's death in 2009. Sylvia recounted that in early 1938, her father had moved to Bradford for work in the oil refineries, planning to return to North Carolina by spring. On Mother's Day, while driving through the Allegheny Forest, he accidentally hit a young girl with his car. Panicking and fearing repercussions, he decided against taking her to the hospital. Instead, he drove back to North Carolina. The girl seemed to recover during the trip, waking up as if she had been napping and appearing unharmed. Rather than returning her to Pennsylvania, Sylvia's father continued to North Carolina, where he renamed the child Sylvia. Sylvia grew up unaware of her true identity as Marjorie West. Despite Sylvia's convincing appearance and compelling story, the evidence was circumstantial. She later obtained a Social Security card and birth certificate, but such documents were not uncommon. Sylvia agreed to a DNA test, which confirmed she was not Marjorie West. Bud Beck continued his investigation for years, but the true fate of Marjorie West remained elusive. Her case remains one of the oldest unsolved missing person cases in the United States. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in our next video.